As Russian soldiers die in droves on the front lines, Putin is hiding away in secret offices all over Russia. The great ostrich of Russian politics has his head firmly buried in the sand, as he is in total denial over what he's seeing. While the Kremlin admits that the Ukraine war is lost, Putin remains the only Russian who seriously believes that Russia can win. This isn't reality. It's a delusion of Putin's own making that persists even as Ukraine does something so gigantic that every plan that Russia has is crumbling. Right now, Ukraine has a massive advantage on the battlefield, and it's all the result of the technology that Ukraine has brought to the fore ever since Putin launched his invasion: drones. Specifically, Ukraine's middle-range drones are wreaking havoc on Russia's forces by striking behind the front lines. This in turn ruins Russian logistics, takes out command and control centers, and stops Russia from launching attacks against Ukraine from its rear. Ukraine has seized this opportunity. It's taking advantage of what's become a clear gulf between its technology and that possessed by Russia to launch counterattacks as it causes chaos in the Russian rear, all of which adds up to one clear fact: Ukraine is in the best position that it's been in for almost a year. That's according to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, who said on April 3rd that intelligence provided by UK sources has revealed that the frontline situation in Ukraine right now is as good for Ukraine as it has been for a long time. By the way, on Wednesday, there was a report from my intelligence and an analysis from British intelligence. I received MI6's assessment of the situation on our front line, specifically that the current situation is the best for Ukraine in the past 10 months, Zelensky declared. Middle-range drones are the big reasons why. And there are plenty inside the Kremlin and Russia's military complex who are trying to warn Putin, even as Russia's president walks around with his fingers shoved firmly in his ears. We'll be coming back to those warnings and Putin's state of delusion soon. First, the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, backs the assessment that Ukraine's drones currently dominate the sky. In an April 10th post on X, the ISW said, "Russian and Ukrainian reporting appears to confirm battlefield reporting that Ukrainian forces have achieved a drone advantage over Russian forces on the battlefield. That advantage lies at the heart of Russia's stalled spring offensive and Ukraine's ability to launch successful counterattacks," the ISW adds. The key to Ukraine's recent successes seems to be an increase in strikes against Russian air defense systems, which has in turn opened up safe aerial corridors to enable the other mid-range drone attacks that we mentioned earlier. The Atlantic Council adds that after years of tit-for-tat fighting on the drone front, Ukraine has definitively pulled ahead against Russia. Short and long-range strikes have been joined by attacks against Putin's forces in the near rear, meaning Ukraine can cover the distance that lies behind the 20 kilometers or so that its FPV drones cover in the vast kill zones of Ukraine, and ahead of the 300 kilometers or more that Ukraine's long-range drones can travel for strikes inside Russia itself. Again, it's all technology. Ukraine's tech is better than Russia's tech, and that is news that Putin simply cannot take. It bucks the narrative, ruins the propaganda. But the numbers don't lie, and they say everything that needs to be said about the Russian offensive right now. Since January, Ukraine's mid-range strikes have come close to tripling in number. According to reports, in January there were 41 strikes. February saw Ukraine unleash 61 of its mid-range drones, heading into March when Ukraine sent 115 of its lethal new weapons in Russia's direction. Those mid-range strikes are part of the 11,000 combat missions per day that the Commander-in-Chief of Ukraine's armed forces, Alexander Syrsky, says that Ukraine's unmanned systems forces are now unleashing. This is unbridled drone dominance, and March was the peak of it all so far. Ukraine's drone forces smashed 150,000 verified targets, which is 50% more than they hit in February. And the numbers keep on coming. Ukraine's medium-range strikes have shattered 143 of Russia's warehouses and logistics facilities, Syrsky adds. Another 52 Russian command posts have fallen to Ukraine's drone dominance, as have 20 of the country's oil, gas, and energy infrastructure facilities in the near rear. These numbers should be undeniable, and to many in Russia, they aren't. Even as Putin tries to keep his head buried in the sand, alarm bells are ringing in the Kremlin. The Russian hierarchy can see the disaster that's unfolding, even if Putin won't, and they're trying to warn him. As RBC Ukraine reported on April 10th, no less than Andrei Belousov, who has been Russia's defense minister since May 2024, having taken the position after Putin ousted Sergei Shoigu, is trying to tell Putin what is happening. Belousov has reportedly stated that the drone situation in Ukraine is now critical, as Ukraine has reached the point where it's achieved both technological and numerical superiority over Russian forces. The loss of Starlink also appears to have reduced the effectiveness of Russia's drone strikes from within the occupied territories, and Ukraine has developed a new generation of equipment that is unlike anything that Russia has ever seen before. Russia is largely unprepared to deal with the more sophisticated systems that Ukraine is deploying, and the Kremlin knows it. The man whom Putin himself appointed to discover these kinds of problems and create solutions is screaming about it from the rooftops, and Putin simply isn't listening. What Belousov is really saying with all of this is that the war, as it stands right now, is lost for Russia, unless Putin can do something other than churn the country's soldiers up in the meat grinder that he created. But if Belousov is trying to calmly break the news to Putin, there are others inside Russia who are far angrier. They are the military bloggers. And they have plenty to say about the state of Russia's campaign in Ukraine right now. If Putin weren't so busy shutting himself off from reality, he would be able to see that the last 4 years have seen the military bloggers go from constant patriotic brown-nosing to open criticism of Russia's invasion. Those bloggers aren't saying that the invasion should have never happened. Instead, they're telling Putin, often indirectly, that the invasion has been a failure because of constant military incompetence. Professional propagandists all over Russia are now turning against Putin. Alexei Chadayev, who heads the Ushkunik facility that is responsible for much of Russia's drone development, has gone from barely being able to open his mouth without singing Putin's praises to criticizing Russian society as a whole. Russia has built feudalism into its society, Chadayev claims, and that backward way of thinking both strips citizens of their rights and closes the door on the sort of innovation that could allow Russia to keep pace with Ukraine's technological advances. Other critics include the military blogger Rybar, who has around 1 million subscribers on Telegram. He and others like him are now saying that Russia's offensive in Ukraine has run into a dead end. They're rallying against the possibility of mobilization, claiming it will be pointless in the current circumstances, and they even accused Putin's generals on the front of hiding reality from him, all so that the Russian president can continue to sail lost in his sea of delusion. Tactics, commanders, and the very version of Russia that Putin has built are being openly criticized by Kremlin cheerleaders. Those cheerleaders aren't doing this out of malice toward Putin. His authoritarianism is what keeps them in business. What they want is for Putin to accept the realities on the battlefield and perhaps realize that tactics that have resulted in over 1.3 million casualties so far, and many more to come, didn't work then and definitely won't work now that Ukraine's drone advantage is so extensive. Things have already started to shift for Russia. But the situation has escalated even further. As Ukraine presses its technology advantage on the front, it's doing the very same thing in the rear. Defense is as effective as offense for Ukraine, and we're going to explain exactly what that means in a moment. Before we do, this is a quick side note to let you know that you are watching The Military Show. There's a lot more where this type of analysis comes from, so subscribe to the channel to make sure you never miss a video. On the defensive front, Ukraine's drone advantage is becoming as critical as its offensive advantage has become. Ukrainian interceptor drones, which are cheap and extremely effective, are taking out more of Russia's long-range attack drones than ever before. Again, the numbers don't lie. Ukraine intercepted 2,975 of Russia's drones in January. That number rose to 3,679 in February. Then it shot up like a rocket. March saw Ukraine take 7,674 of Russia's drones out of the sky before they could do any sort of damage, the ISW reports. Don't underestimate the importance of this particular battlefield evolution. The main reason why Russia launches so many drones at Ukraine is so it can achieve precisely what Ukraine is doing right now against Russia's forces. Shaheeds are supposed to shatter Ukraine's infrastructure. They destroy military targets, terrorize civilians, and break energy networks. All of this is in service of weakening Ukraine's defense on the front. But now, as Ukraine's interception rate rises and Russia can find no answer for the technological advances Ukraine has brought to the battlefield, all of that is slipping away. Ukraine is cracking Russia's rear. Russia is failing to do the same to Ukraine. And what has Putin's response been to all of this? He merely leans into the false Ukraine war narrative while acting as though Russia is still acting from a place of power. We have seen this as recently as April 7th, when faced with the news that Ukraine has blown past Russia on the drone technology front. Putin hasn't done anything substantial to address the problem. He certainly isn't changing Russia's tactics. Russia lost 1,440 soldiers in the 24 hours leading up to April 11th alone, so the cannon fodder is still being served up to Ukraine's drones on a platter. No, all Putin has been able to muster as a response to all of this is to shoot off a limp warning to the Baltic states, which he believes are aiding Ukraine in its long-range drone campaign against Russia. There have been nebulous threats of a response from Russia if the likes of Estonia and Latvia, along with Finland, allow Ukraine to use their airspace to launch long-range strikes against Russia's Baltic Sea oil infrastructure. Ukraine has been doing a lot of that. Russia's two main Baltic ports were shut down in late March and into early April as Ukraine's drones hit them over and over again. But this is all that Putin can do. he throws around the same threats that he always does, while he completely misunderstands and ignores the real problem that is facing him. It's not that the Baltic nations are helping Ukraine out that Putin has to worry about. His own purposeful delusions are a far bigger problem. And chief among those delusions is the idea that Russia is somehow capable of winning the war that Putin started. On April 9th, Robert Fox, who is the defense editor at UK outlet The Standard, laid out Putin's refusal to accept reality. They are striking in depth into Russia, and it's causing real damage, Fox says of Ukraine, before adding, but the problem, while this is getting into the Russian papers about the damage that's being done, Putin himself is in complete denial about this. There it is. Even as Russian media, the country's military bloggers, and even his own defense minister warn him, Putin is refusing to listen to anybody. He is fast becoming the only Russian who believes that this war can still be won, even as the Kremlin itself is telling him that the situation in Ukraine is critical. The question now is, how long can Putin stay in denial as everything around him collapses? In March, Russia's monthly casualty rate rose by 29% to reach a record-breaking 35,351, with 96% of those casualties being caused by drones. The same month also saw Russia break its record for the most casualties in a single day in 2026, when it lost 1,710 soldiers on March 17. But we know that death on the battlefield won't register with Putin, even when the numbers are so high. He treats his soldiers like cannon fodder, so they're pretty much doing what he expects them to do. What may just get Putin's attention is Ukraine's antics in Russia's Baltic ports. An expected windfall of almost $1 billion created by the surge in oil prices that has come in the wake of Operation Epic Fury in Iran has been snatched out of the Kremlin's grasp due to those Baltic drone strikes. Putin is even getting warnings from his enemies that it's time to stop a war that he can't win. France's Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs, Jean-Noël Barrot, told Putin exactly what he faces when the European Union announced a new raft of sanctions back in March. That's the reality, so Vladimir Putin has to face facts. The war of aggression in which he plunged his country at the risk of draining and discrediting it must stop. It's a strategic, political and economic failure that must end now, Barrot says as he highlighted Russia's failings not just in Ukraine, but everywhere in the world. In Africa, Barrot says, the European Union now invests 200 times more than Russia. That's a sphere of influence that is slipping away from Putin. The losses of Nicolas Maduro, Ali Khamenei, and Bashar al-Assad in Venezuela, Iran, and Syria, respectively, have dealt even more blows to Russia's global influence. Putin is collapsing on the global stage, as well as in Ukraine. Surely, Putin has to start listening to somebody. His own ministers, Russian military bloggers, overseas ministers, the burning oil, the dead Russian soldiers, the hole in the Russian bank balance, the whiz of Ukraine's mid-range drones as they take out yet more assets in the near rear. At least one of these things has to be able to break through Putin's denial, to make him realize that whatever victory he had once envisioned for the Ukraine war is now impossible. You'd like to think so, wouldn't you? But Putin is still locked up in his delusion, and it's leading him to take actions that seem like they come from a position of power to him, but are actually signs of desperation for everybody who is paying attention to Russia's many failures in Ukraine. When Putin gave his New Year's Eve address in Russia at the end of 2025, he told the Russian people that he, and by extension they, should believe in Russia's military and its victory. That was around the time that Russia was pretending to capture territory that it didn't hold. As 2026 has gone on and Ukraine's drone advantage has become clearer, Putin continues to try to hold together the crumbling narrative of an inevitable Russian victory. We saw that toward the end of March, which, as you may remember, was a record-breaking month for Russian casualties in 2026. Putin responded to the sheer scale of death that his antiquated tactics have caused among his own soldiers by delivering Ukraine a 2-month deadline to get out of the Donbass. What happens if Ukraine refuses? Russia will attack and win, somehow. Just how Russia is going to do that when the spring offensive that Russia launched in March has made no real gains, and Ukraine is wrecking the Russian rear with mid-range drones, is anybody's guess. Speaking of that offensive, March 25th saw United 24 media sum up how it's really going for Putin. It noted that Ukraine had wiped out a week's worth of Russian recruits in just 3 days, with those exploits being highlighted by the record-breaking 1,710 casualties in one day that we mentioned earlier. This is the reality of the spring offensive, a messy massacre of Putin's patsies as they get battered on the front and in the rear. But how could they expect anything better? In addition to this denial and delusion, Putin is engrossed by an unhealthy paranoia that could well mean that he has no real idea about what is happening on the front. This is a man who doesn't use a cell phone or the internet, as Business Insider revealed in a 2023 expose that also saw it claim that Putin will only take battlefield updates if they're delivered by members of his closest circle. Putin has created an information vacuum around himself, and anybody who tries to penetrate that vacuum tends not to last too long around him. Uh-oh, Mr. Borisov. Perhaps you shouldn't have been so forthright about Russia's drone technology position. A fall from a window might be in your future. Or if you're lucky, a trumped-up corruption charge from the very man who encourages corruption throughout the Kremlin. There are even more rumors that Putin has resorted to asking Russia's oligarchs to directly fund the Ukraine war, though Politico reports that Putin has denied these rumors. Still, that would show that he has at least some sort of understanding of how badly the war has failed. Russia shouldn't need to ask for more money for a military undertaking that was supposed to be over in days, but it's been 4 years, and things are only getting worse for Russia. Putin's complete denial of what's happening in Ukraine means that the war is lost. Russia isn't coming back from Ukraine's drone advantage, and there are plenty of voices around Putin that Russia's leader simply ignores. We've highlighted some of them in this video, but there are many more. Ukraine's battlefield strategy is triggering more alarm bells in the Kremlin than the ones we've spoken about here, and you can find out all about them if you check out our video. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure that you hit subscribe so you don't miss what the military show has in store next. And thank you as always for watching.